Scaramagat, and thank you, Cahirlock, and thank you to the Minister for being here with us today, and to Senator Roisin Garvey for bringing this motion on youth mental health and guidance services in secondary schools. I'm on the Mental Health Committee, and we need to be speaking more about mental health, and I think we are in the last year or 2 years, but we should never underestimate that there is a stigma, of course, with speaking about this, and it can be difficult for young people, particularly in schools, to talk about this, but we need to be the role models there. But I was also on a mental health webinar this week, and again it was talking about the impacts for young people and the challenges that they face and the impacts, and particularly it was looking at CAMS, But I know that here in your motion you are speaking specifically about secondary schools and the role of guidance counsellors, and I suppose it's incredible to think the role has changed significantly, I'd say, since I was in school. It's broadened out. There's so much ambition for young people now in terms of when they're coming up to their final years, and the excitement around that and the opportunity and the potential for young people. And I think career guidance counsellors are so involved in that with students in classes across the country. But of course, it's really important that we see now, particularly after COVID, that career guidance counsellors are also taking on that role on the emotional side and on the social side. And it is very important that we have enough counsellors in our schools to be able to support our students. And as Senator Garvey here is speaking to, I suppose it's really, and in the sort of the information session this morning with Jigsaw and with the ICGC, it was very important to sort of understand that what they're asking for is that there's enough hours given. I suppose what you're calling for here is that there's to reduce the ratio of full-time guidance counsellors in order to increase the number of guidance counsellors available to our students, and looking also at restoring ex-quota status. I suppose if I might just comment on some of the other areas as well, I suppose for me that I can see as relevant here. You mentioned DEIS schools, and there's been an increase, and Minister Foley, of course, has just brought in, last year, an increase for the first time in a number of years, actually, the amount of DEIS schools that we have in the country. But, it was more primary schools. I was very fortunate that the secondary school in Ballinasloe Art School was granted DEIS status, but it was the only secondary school actually in County Galway that was granted that. But in doing so, as Senator Garvey has noted, there are additional supports, and it's absolutely crucial. And even now, I probably would ask the question as well around the qualifications for career guidance counsellors, and maybe working with the ICGC. I'd be very interested, Minister, in your comments on this one, but can we look at the qualifications and the expertise and the experience that career guidance counsellors would bring, like the examples of psychotherapy and so on, and on the social side, are there other experiences and expertise that could be part of that? Because I would say that when people are recruiting for the position of guidance counsellors in schools, they're probably looking at different skill sets right now. I suppose the role of Jigsaw, and in the sort of webinar that I was on Monday, Jigsaw and Dr. Duffy, who also presented this morning, spoke very much about the one good adult. And I know that young people, obviously, in our schools need support. I know that, obviously, in our secondary schools as well. But I very much am interested in, there's sort of a youth mental health sort of certificate that Jigsaw run. And if I might just highlight that is a specialist certificate in youth mental health around being one good adult, and about how, I suppose, in our clubs and across our towns and our villages, that we would be seeing that more of our coaches in clubs and in different places that young people would frequent would also be interested in doing something like that, a youth mental health certificate. I know Minister Foley and Minister Madigan are very focused on mental health and the welfare of students and young people in school. And I understand that there is that dedicated team to support and strengthen, I suppose, the guidance provision in schools, and that started like last September, under the Department of Education Support Services. And I know that the Minister is also looking at junior cycle and the guidance around that. And this is all great to see, but of course it needs to happen very quickly. We do need to have this in place. And that's a note, I suppose, in relation to social and personal guidance counselling. One of the elements I think that's very important as well for young people and for young people moving from leaving cert is the transition period. That again is a really stressful time. And I think that that's very important coming from 6th class into first year. So, how we're supporting our first years coming into school is a particularly difficult, stressful time, and it's a transition period. And I'm sure many parents feel that as well when their children are moving from a national school into a secondary school, but also again going from leaving cert and into 3rd level. It's very clear that a lot of our young people would need additional support, and that's maybe where the role of guidance counsellors I think would come in, and where I'd like to see a lot more increase in supports been made available. I suppose we're aware that there's 928 guidance counsellors currently across the post-primary system. And I suppose what I would like to see as well is that under mental health, and I suppose I'm looking at this from a mental health perspective as well, but on the mental health side, I know that the allocation of budget is the highest ever, 1.2 billion, but we do need, of course, more. But of that, there's a certain amount, over 137 million was for CAMS. But as well as that, what they're looking at doing is hiring or recruiting at a very senior level the posts of youth mental health lead at assistant national director level in the HSC and a new clinical lead for youth mental health. Both of these positions, when people are in situ, are going to be driving access to mental health services and perhaps engaging with the Department of Education around how we're delivering supports to young people, because it's not in silos. We don't deliver supports in just one segment. It has to be integrated, and we need to be looking at how we do this across multiple departments. Again, I would just like to say thank you to Senator Garvey, very happy to support her in this. And again, we'd be very happy to sort of hear maybe from the Minister how maybe working within the Department of Education and the Department of Mental Services and the Department of Health and Public Health, could we make how would they work well together? Thanks, Minister.